And that's when my heart sunk, because I knew it was Lance. I want to be here and I want to be talking about this. And it's very hard, makes me nervous, and it makes my mind run 1,000,000 miles an hour. Here, this picture here, you could see the rage coming out. You can see the anger in this man. I've seen that look before, right before everything goes drastically wrong. I've seen this look right before he explodes. It was very ugly. There would be no stopping him short of killing him. It's terrible to say. People call him a monster, call him evil. It's probably because it's true. This is the most recent picture of my brother Lance in prison. That looks scary right there. I've never seen this. This is that look after he's done something bad. This is that, I really don't give a F or what you do or what you think about it or what the cops plan on doing. That's the look of, I do not care about anything in this world. It just looks scary. It just looks empty. I think it's a good thing that he has been caught and locked away. I hate that he actually had to kill someone for that to happen, but it's a good thing that this guy's locked up. He's very dangerous. Very. I've never been able to talk about what it's like to live with my brother. So I was very young when I realized my brother Lance was capable of evil. It was very scary to grow up with. I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. There was me, and I had 3 other brothers, and my mother and father lived with us. And Lance was the oldest. My father was there for us. He was a hard worker. He worked most of his life, and he was not at home all the time. He went to work, and then he went out to do his own thing. My parents, they would go out to the certain club, and they'd play cards almost every day, and Lance was there supposed to be babysitting us. That's when the abusive stuff would happen. Lance had the reign of the house. Everyone looked up to him because he was a star football player. But Lance drank. When he would start to drink, then you would see him kind of turn scary. Everything would get more dangerous. Everything would get more edgy. You either did what he said to do or you're going to get beat. That's just the way it was. Then there's one time he threw me on the couch. It started off as playful, and then it got into more brutal. He'd subdue you and put pillows over top of you. Lance was a very big guy. He would sit on top of the weight of his whole body on these pillows on top of you till you felt like you were smothered and you couldn't breathe. And I'm telling him, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And he's just sitting on top of you, just laughing, thinking it's funny, You're crying and can't, breathe. It was not funny. Being such a young child, your mind goes right to that. It's instant panic. I was screaming to get up, get off of me, let me up. Once he heard you crying and screaming, then he'd let you up. It was almost as if that's what he wanted to hear. One time for Christmas, my parents got me and my brothers boxing gloves. With the boxing gloves came other kids from the neighborhood being interested in boxing also. They would bring their boxing gloves and we would hold little matches on our porch. It was kind of like a boxing ring. My brother Lance got the idea to hold some boxing matches.
I want to see you guys fight.
It started off as good, clean fun. I had learned a little bit about boxing, and my friends didn't know anything about boxing. And sometimes it would get ugly. They would make me box my friends. I had a friend named Frankie that lived down the street. There was no beef between me or him or anything, and Lance just made us box just because we were there. Hey, how about you two get it on this time? My friend knew nothing about boxing when my brother Lance was like, get him.
Take him out.
And I hit him with a couple good ones. I mean, I could see he wanted to quit. And Lance is standing there by, encouraging you. Beat him up. I would do what Lance told me to do. Lance was too scared to say no to. Now, I remember my friend taking off and going home crying that day. He did not want to be my friend too much longer after that. I lost a friend that day. Lance was in his element. He was getting off on this, to see you fight. I'm sure he just liked the violence of it. Lance was always kind of devious, thinking of new ways to do some evil stuff. There was this one morning where I'd woken up and my middle brother was still asleep and he was laying in the bed. Lance got my parents' shotgun out of the back of the closet and he said, hey, let's put it on our brother's face. Wouldn't that be funny when he wakes up? I didn't know any better. I didn't know what a gun would do to you, at that time. This is the first time I'd ever held a gun or touched a gun. And the gun was very heavy. It was very big. I actually needed Lance to hold the gun. We both had a hold of it like this. We just tapped my brother on the bridge of his nose with the double-barrel shotgun, like, hey, wake up. And he woke up and his eyes open. He was terrified. When I saw my brother and how terrified he was, it was not funny anymore. The whole time Lance was holding this gun, he had a devious laugh. You heard that laugh, and he was enjoying it. When I think about that now, I feel terrified for my brother and for us. What if that gun would have went off? That'd be terrible to live with. I was so young that it did not even register in my mind that aftermath that could have happened. That's the terrifying thing of it. I didn't even know if it was loaded or not. This particular day, right after school, and I come home and I would play with my little brother. Lance and his girlfriend were arguing in the next room. And we could hear him. He was always arguing with the women, always fighting with his women. And then I heard a gunshot. Lance is supposed to be babysitting me and my little brother at this time. Instead, he's arguing with girls, putting guns to their head. When I heard the gunshot, I just instinctively look up and I could see the bullet go over top of our heads, out one wall and through the other wall. It's chaos, pandemonium, total chaos. And I immediately jumped up and just ran and kicked in the bathroom door, pushed the door open.
Get out!
To see, Lance and the girl in there. The girl screaming, Lance standing there with the gun. I was afraid.
Shut up now!
I was thinking like, oh my God, he shot this girl in her face. But he did not. What had happened, he had shot right by her head. And the gunpowder and all of that hit her in the face and burnt her face. And that's why she was bent over crying like that. She did not say anything. It's like it never happened. There was no consequence for him in that whole situation, which only fueled the evil things he could do. He had gotten away with that one. When that happened, you just knew in your mind and your heart that he was capable of this. You always kind of had your mind and your heart prepared for what craziness is going to come next. By now he was getting in trouble, getting locked up a lot, drinking a lot. So I knew that he was committing burglaries. He would never tell me exactly where and what these burglaries were, but I just knew. There was this one night that my brother Lance and some of his other friends, they just were out late night and I seen them come home and they went into the garage. So I snuck out of the house to see what they had. I seen that they had 6 or 7 big bags of marijuana. Big trash bags full. There was a part of me that wondered where they got this from, but I knew they had broken in and stole it from someone. And I sat there and watched the whole thing. I'm sure him breaking in had a lot to do with just the thrill of it. He just did it out of pure just adrenaline, just because he could. Just the simple fact of it being the wrong thing to do. I knew they were out doing bad things, but I was just glad that my big brother made it home. I did not want him to get arrested again. Even though I knew it was wrong, because I still wanted him to make it home and be safe. Lance broke into the house right next door to our house. And the girl that used to do babysitting and house sitting for him saw Lance going into the window. Someone called the cops. Lance was in the house when the cops came. So he ran down in the basement and barricaded himself down in the basement. Lance was big, he was strong, full of rage, and had no fear. Once they broke through to go get him, he'd beat them all up, 5 or 6 cops. They can't get him under control. They had to call the SWAT, riot gear. I just remember that day, they all tied him to a stretcher and carry him out. And they carried him out of there, and the neighbors were all looking. It was very embarrassing. I'm not sure what was in the mind of my parents at such a young age. I think they wanted to all just chalk it up to, we're just young. I'm sure that my family was disappointed and a little bit heartbroken. Then almost every time after that he got arrested, that's how many cops it took to arrest him. Almost every time. He got arrested a lot after that. By the time this incident happened, it was starting to become the norm. So you just kind of knew in your mind, like, well, you can forget to see him the next year or so. He'll be gone for a year. There was this one day that I was coming home from school. I saw that the police had the whole neighborhood taped off. And what I had learned was my friend who lived up the street, she had been decapitated and dismembered. The whole neighborhood was devastated. We did not ever find out what happened. Even today, murder unsolved. The next morning, I looked out my window, and written in the frost of the window were the words, "You're next." Later on in life, I talked to my other brother, and almost at the same time, we asked the same question. Do you think Lance had anything to do with that back then? When I look back now, I get kind of terrified thinking about it. I could have been killed at, any time. I would have never seen it coming. Knowing what I know of Lance now, it makes me wonder, did he do that murder? Lance might have been bad, but we didn't think he was that bad. We didn't think he was capable of anything like that. We did not think that about him. Looking back now, I question it. Lance had a very secretive side to himself. He'd go off and do devious things by himself. He didn't need a crowd of people or people to follow him. He'd just do it himself. So maybe he could have done it back then. He had done so much wrong and evil stuff. The next criminal step for him was to kill someone. It was the only thing that he had not been caught for. Lance would get drunk and get angry or aggressive. The more he drank, the worse he would get. He would say, "I'm going to kill you," or "I'm going to do this to you," or "I'll do that to you." It was always to the extreme.
You're dead!
I would always see the remnants of whatever happened. The bruises and the black eyes, and he would beat her till she was unrecognizable. He would do that a lot. Felt very sad for her also. I felt heartbreaking for her. She was very nice to me. She was a very wonderful person. There was this one day, they were arguing. The next thing I knew, he had thrown her down in the basement and locked the door. The basement was very scary. It was very dark and damp, and we had a rat infestation, and he'd throw you down there with the lights off.
I know you're there, let me out!
I could hear her yelling through the door to let her out. She was like my babysitter. She took care of me. She cleaned for me. She cooked for me. She was kind of like a second mom, actually. So that made it even more hurtful. But I knew what would be waiting if I did let her out. Told her, I said, "No, I cannot let you out." Because I knew in the back of my mind, if I let her out, then he'd throw me a beating, a worse beating. I just walked away and was watching TV in the living room. I could still hear her begging for someone to let her out the basement. I just tried to act like it wasn't happening. Yeah, I knew in my heart that I should have helped her, but I just could not do that. I was afraid of Lance beating me. One time, he was upset at his girlfriend, and she just had the baby. My parents were telling him to get out of the house. Well, he said, I'll go, but I'm gonna take my baby with me. And my mom was like, no, you're not taking that baby. My dad's a very big guy too, and he has that kind of blind rage himself. You don't want to push him there. He ended up throwing Lance out the door. Well, Lance got a big giant metal rake and came and threw it through this plate glass window we had. That glass went flying everywhere, it just sounded like a bomb went off. And I remember they were called the police on him that night, but he had taken off. We moved different sides of town, north side, east side of Columbus. We moved, but Lance was still living at home. My other older brother that came to live with us had a girlfriend, and it was getting pretty serious. She had moved from another state to stay with my brother. They had a little relationship that went on for a while. She was really good friends with my mother, and she's really good friends with the whole family, We took her in just like she was one of our own. Lance had his eyes on her. Lance was just kind of like that. He kind of had his eyes on everybody. I think Lance stayed pretty clear from her, why her and my other brother were dating, but once they broke up, maybe in his mind, he thought she was fair game. But she did not want him. To some degree, he could control himself. But, once her and my older brother broke up, there was no controlling Lance about that situation anymore. It was beginning to get worse. When he raped her, I didn't understand the nature of the crime, but I knew the person he had done it to. I was still so young, I didn't understand the repercussions of what a rape is. I didn't know this is something that would stick with you your whole life. There was never much discussion about what Lance had done because it was so full of hurt and disappointment. You just knew he was gone and that was it. But as I began to get older, this girl, I would see her once every couple years. And as I began to understand what rape was and all about, every time I would see her, it just kind of made me feel sad for her. It was kind of heartbreaking. I began to understand what that means, to live with for years, that it's forever, something that can affect somebody forever. And a lot of bad repercussions can come from it. To be afraid of Lance and at the same time still have love for him as a brother, it's just, love does strange things, A person that could beat on you and get taken away, you still love them and miss them. So I was kind of conflicted between the two. This was the first time he got locked up for a significant period of time. Everything up to this point was small potatoes. But now he's going to the big house, big crime. This was the first time that we knew Lance had committed rape and was convicted of it. Oh, what craziness is going to come next? This photo here is me and my brother Lance. This is in West Virginia. I'd just gotten a brand new home, and this is probably the first time Lance and all my other brothers and their children and my mother, They all come down to see my house, kind of like a housewarming kind of thing. Lance had just got out of prison not too long before this picture was snapped. Lance had already done 20 years in prison. Half his life he spent in prison already in that picture. And now we were coming together, and I'd pretty much forgotten all the traumatizing stuff from as a child. And he got a job, and someone introduced him to his wife. Everything was going great for him. Was starting to feel like everything was going to be okay. Him and his wife and my other brothers, they would all come down and see me every once in a while. We'd have, cookouts, bonfires at night, laughing, joking. Felt good, to have my brothers back, where I was feeling for so long that I had lost brothers. All of that bullying stuff, it's all over with now. He called and said he was over this girl's house. Once I got there, he was already asleep. I was trying everything I could to wake him up. I was shaking him, I was screaming at him, I was hollering at him, kept trying to shake him. He would not wake up. It was like he was in a coma or something. He was just asleep. Checked on him the next day. He was still asleep. Came back and did the same thing again. Tried to shake him and wake him. The next day, he would not wake up. Called the next day. He was still sleeping. By now, this is 3 days he's been asleep. So I really didn't understand. I thought maybe he was just sleeping a binger off or something like that. But every time I come knock on the door, she's like, he's still asleep. I'd go home, give it a couple hours, I'd call. She's like, I try to wake him up, he's still asleep. I was concerned of whatever it was he went through to be like that. He finally woke up and gave me a call. I rushed right down and got him. I did ask him the night he come to the house, what was going on? What's wrong? What are you doing here? He told me that him and his wife, they got into a fight. Lance said that, he's having some problems at home, and I just basically believed it, It was easy to chalk it up to that. Yep, he must just got in a fight and just, getting away from the problem, whatever it was. It did make sense to me then. It sounded like something, it sounded like Lance. And he came in like, hey man, hey dog, I gotta go. I didn't understand why he just took off just like that in an instant. He was hanging around for 3 months and then he just leaves just like that. And that actually was it. That was it. No explanations, no anything. I felt like he had used me as soon as he left, Not really a thank you or anything. He was just quick handshake and tried to walk out the door. So I was just kind of like, whatever, man, just go on. I was hurt. I was hurt by that. Maybe less than a week later, someone from the family called me and was like, hey man, your brother's on the news. I'm like, what? What's he on the news for now, I turned on the news, and that's when I seen that the cops had Lance's home surrounded, and the caption on the news story was a SWAT standoff with a murder suspect. He was accused of murdering 3 women. I was just totally blown away, like, what? Like, they was telling me they'd been looking for him the whole time where he was at my house. I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I had no idea, just totally clueless and just blown away. It was the furthest thing from my mind that I thought was going on. So that's when I started to put 2 and 2 together. At the time he did these crimes and come down, and he was staying at this girl's house, and he slept for 3 days straight. It made me concerned about why he slept so much. But knowing what I know now, they call it the murder sleep. That's where you let out all the stress and the strain and the guilt of doing these crimes. That's what happened. So that's why he took off and came to my house, because they had been looking for him to question him about these murders. Just hit me like a ton of bricks, and I was like, oh, this is it. He's finally reached the final plateau of crime. The investigators came to the house and they asked me the questions, and I said, now let me ask you guys a question. I said, do you really think he did this?
Are you sure?
And one of the investigators, and he turned around with a very serious look, and he looked down his glasses and he said, you think we'd drive 5 hours if we didn't think he did this? Then I knew this was it. Just always seemed like a matter of time, but he was out and doing so well, it was the furthest thing from my mind. I didn't think that would happen. I definitely developed hope that he was past the worst. There were no discussions that I was included in about that. And it was such a bad crime that people were hesitant to talk about it. So I was basically just clueless in whatever was going on. I had no idea what was going on, when he was going to court or exact charges he was charged with. I was in the dark. David Lance Bruce might be spending the rest of his life in prison. A Fairfield County jury of 5 women and 7 men found Bruce guilty of 2 counts of aggravated murder, 1 count of murder, 1 count of kidnapping, and 2 counts of aggravated robbery. The maximum sentence he could be given is life in prison without parole. Bruce's mother is sad about the guilty verdict and that her son is going to prison, but is relieved he didn't get the death penalty. I didn't know my mom was there every day. I didn't know he was on trial for sentence could have been the death penalty. I didn't know. I separated myself from that situation. It makes me very sad for my mother to know that she went through that now, and she was there by herself. I'm sure she went there every day by herself, drove there herself, sat there herself, afterwards by herself, probably cried about it by herself. That's heartbreaking when you think about it. I was just so blown away from it and just wanting to just separate myself from the whole thing. Then I did not wonder about the trial. I did not watch it or participate in it. It was just too much. I separated myself from that situation just because, I had family and I had kids, and I could not have them be a part of that. He wasted a lot of his life. He could have done something. He could have stopped going to prison. He could have helped himself. But there was always this thing that he just couldn't stop. I'm sure everyone that knows him is wondering the same thing. Did he have it in him? Did he do it before? Did he do it again? It's a big question. There was a lot of evidence against him. I don't know. He's reached out. We have spoken a couple times. I can't afford to put my feelings inside of it. I have to keep going on with my life.
And what is it like to hear from him?
It's sad to hear from him. It's really sad to hear from him, knowing that he's going to be gone forever and feels like helpless, like there's nothing I can do for you. I can't help you. You've put yourself there, and I can't get you out. Like, there's nothing anyone can do. I could go and visit him. I could talk to him on the phone, but to talk to him about everything he'd done in life and to me, no, that's still a challenge for me. I think there was a little bit of part of me that just, was thinking like, how could you do that? I just don't want to be a part of you anymore, I was done. There are a lot of victims there, not just with this case, all the other cases before. Think about how many families or victims that he's just destroyed and devastated. Being a brother is someone you look out for, you protect, and you educate them and help them grow up. Teach them the right and wrongs of life. That's what being a brother is.
Did Lance do any of that for you?
No, Lance did not do any of that. He did all the opposite of everything I just mentioned. The things he did were definitely wrong, and they could never be forgiven. There is no fixing that. I would not want to see harm come to him, but he's definitely where he needs to be, paying for his crimes. I feel like I'm able to move through life pretty good because of all of the stuff that I've been through. And the stuff that Lance did kind of shook me to my core and made me realize I better get myself together or I might end up in the same position one day. That I can be better than that in life, and gave me a goal to go after to make me the person who I am today.
David and I were close. He told me, "I wish you were my sister." He loved to collect stickers. I love to collect stickers. There's Skeletor, Spider-Man, Elmer Fudd. Remember the Pudding Pops? He started a sticker album just 11 months before he went missing. His mom looked at every face of every kid in the crowd to see if it was Dave. But the more time he was missing, the more we kind of knew that he wasn't coming home again. All we would picture then is poor Dave laying there, suffering, dying, and no one's going to help him. It's really hard to think about. If you have someone missing, don't stop pushing until you find the answers because they depend on you to do it for them. Don't give up. Schuylkill-Haven's a quiet little town for the most part. Didn't really hear a lot of big, scary stories until all this came about. After that, things changed. It wasn't the safe little town it was. It's dusk. And kids in this neighborhood are squeezing the last minutes of lights out of a summer day. Everybody kind of sort of knows everybody. It's one of those close-knit towns considered to be pretty safe. Normal. Back then. We would just go out with our friends. Parents told you when to be home. You were home at that time. Be home at night. Before it got dark or before the streetlights came on. Every day was a normal day for us. Just hanging outside, playing in the yards, jumping rope, my mom doing laundry. Her normal thing. By 7:30 p.m., most kids are begging for dessert and stalling bedtime. But that's not happening at David Reed's house. David is almost 13 years old. I was home with my mom. And I remember my mom getting a phone call from my Aunt Joan, Dave's mom. He hadn't come home for supper. Honestly, the first thought, when he didn't come home. I thought, uh-oh, he's in trouble. He stayed out later than he should have. You know? And then I thought, well, that's not like him, though. As darkness falls, Joan's concern deepens. David has juvenile diabetes, so he has to eat, and soon. She sent his older brothers out to look for him. His places that he would normally look. They checked everywhere. Sometimes they ride their bikes around over by the railroad tracks. All his friends' houses, playgrounds, any place they thought he could have been. When Dave had left the house that day, he was wearing a possible Republican t-shirt, a pair of blue jeans and blue sneakers. Dave was a paper boy for the Pottsville Republican. He delivered in town, in Schuylkill Haven. David was just a sweet boy. He dreamed of being a pilot. He was shy, and he was quiet. But yet, he was protective. His sister Kathy was closer in age with me. If Kathy and I would have an argument of some sort, he would come and he would sit me down on the steps and put his arm around me. He'd tell me, "It's okay. I'll protect you." Dave wasn't one for confrontation. He wasn't one that liked to fight. He wouldn't defend himself as quickly as he would defend others. He was very affectionate, always hugging his mom, telling his mom he loved her and his older sister. Virginia. He was out every day on his bike, riding around, and he'd always tell his mom every time before he left the house, "I love you. Mom, I'll be back." And off he'd go, on his bike. By the time nightfall came, it started getting later. My aunt, started to worry. The longer the time went on, the more panic it was, and the more upset. There was no consoling his mom. She was a wreck. Because that's not her son. He's always home. Joan calls police out of panic, and they start searching for David right away. In fact, on August 21st of 1985, I saw that there was numerous firemen searching the area down by the railroad tracks. I checked and found out that a young boy had been missing. Generally, when a child would be reported missing in Schuylkill Haven, we would find out who their friends were, check their local playground, and usually within a matter of a few hours, the child would be located and returned home. Initially, I thought it was a runaway, that he might have been staying at some friends' houses or something like that. He wouldn't have ran away. He didn't have it bad at home. There was no reason for him to be a runaway or anything like that. So the part of him just being missing, it was so scary. Dave's bike was found by his sister, Virginia. It was on the railroad tracks in the bushes. Virginia was devastated when they found the bike. It made the realization that, there was definitely something wrong, and we just needed to find out what it was. There's the bike. Where's Dave? He's not with his bike. That's highly unusual. Dave's bike was like his right arm. He wouldn't go anywhere without it. He wouldn't just leave it behind. It was like his best friend. There was no damage that I recall to David's bike. Fingerprints would not have been of any assistance at that point because of being left out in the open and so many people being in the area. Word of David's disappearance travels fast. Within days, tips and sightings of the missing teen roll into police headquarters. Initially, there had been some rumors that David had gone by the railroad tracks with 2 or 3 individuals. They were questioned numerous times. They all denied seeing David that night. We had gotten reports that David had been at a party at a house on Cadwell Street. We interviewed anybody and everybody we could there. Each and every one of them denied seeing David at that house when he went missing. Things did not look good for David after the first 3 days, and nothing was panning out. It was not very hopeful at that point. Jenny took it hard, and she wanted people to do things, and she kind of felt, I think, helpless. It was really frustrating that, the police couldn't come up with anything. My aunt cried just nonstop. She would just come to our house. I could still picture her sitting in the chair and just crying and crying. As time went on, days turned into weeks and then months. We had no idea where he was or who he was with or if he was even okay. My brothers and I walked all over Schuylkill Haven, and I think we hung these on every telephone pole, put them in every grocery store, every storefront window that we could possibly find. in all hopes of trying to get some information. There were many times I took extra walks in what would be the train yard. Again, checking the boxcars and the cabooses that were left there, checking the bushes in the area. I figured if anything had happened to David, it would have had to have been somewhere in that area. And there was no David. David's mom didn't change a thing in his room. His bed was made. His toys were out. She bought him Christmas presents. All his gifts that she had bought for him months earlier are just sitting there, all wrapped up, waiting for him to have them open. David's family holds out for good news. Then, Officer Reedy gets the call that changes everything. I was contacted to respond to an address over on Cadwell Street because of something that had been found. I remember talking to the officer who responded to the house. The officer explained to me that when he walked in, he was in total shock that there was a skull sitting on the table. Investigators have a grim lead in the search for David Reed. A Schuylkill Haven resident has found a skull in the woods not far from his home. Initially, the family over on Cadwell Street had lost a cat, and they went up into the woods behind their house, which was a rather steep embankment area, not an area that people would normally go through. And when he was up there looking for the cat, he found the skull. I couldn't imagine why anyone would disturb the remains of someone they found for any purpose. You would think they would know not to touch anything. Call the police. Get them there. Get them to see everything intact as it was. I've heard of people finding bones and going back to the house and telling the police where they're at, but not collecting them and bringing them back. The man who found the skull takes investigators back into the woods, where there are even more bones. There was a very small opening between the trees, and you could see that there were human remains laying on the ground, and there was clothing that was associated with it. Among the bones, investigators find what's left of a white t-shirt with a faded logo. The shirt matches the description of what David was wearing when he went missing 4 months earlier. The fact that the remains had a white t-shirt and writing on it was possibly from the Republican and blue jeans. That pretty much sealed the deal that it was David that had been found. My mom was screaming, "You know, it can't be." And one of the hardest things I've ever seen in my life is, my dad cry, and, I'm not sure that I cried right away because I didn't understand it. Like, I just couldn't wrap my head around it. David's mom still held on to the hope, even though they found the t-shirt on the remains. Not him. It's not. My Davy's still alive. And she wouldn't bring herself to believe it. It wasn't until they used the dental records to identify that she finally broke down. Okay, my son's not coming home. The case has gone from a disappearance to now a young boy is dead in the community without an explanation. And that's frightening. I think it was almost the whole town of Schuylkill Haven. Everybody just started getting so protective. Normally, you would see kids out hanging out and walking, riding bikes, and it just seems like all of a sudden, if the kids weren't in a group, they weren't all by themselves anymore. David's death casts a dark shadow over this normally peaceful town. Media coverage of the case intensifies. That means new tips, leads, and evidence. While the officers were investigating, an individual approached and provided additional bones to the investigators. Schuylkill Haven resident Joe Geiger gives police bone fragments and what appears to be a human jawbone. Geiger lives just a few miles from where David's skull was found. David Reed of Schuylkill Haven disappeared in the summer of 1985. They came back to the house and they were chewing on bones, and at the time I didn't think nothing of it. His dog had been bringing him home, and he was throwing him in a bucket by his front porch. A pathologist determines these bones are the remains of David Reed. The additional bones could yield clues that can help investigators solve this case. We were hoping that the pathologist would have been able to examine the bones and determine what the cause of death was. An autopsy that was performed had attributed the death to natural causes. But like many people in the community, the state police, they weren't really accepting that was what happened to David. We were told that it was juvenile diabetes, and I don't believe a single member of the department believed that it didn't fit. Investigators have no witnesses and no other physical evidence. So they ask an anthropologist to examine David's bones. I am one of these folks that really likes a challenge, especially one where we don't know the story. In addition to teeth marks left by animals, Monge finds a fracture on the back of David's skull. So the complicated suture pattern that you see at the back of the skull is the connection actually between the parietals at the top and then the occipital bone at the back. So what happened in the case of David Reed is something clearly hit his head and those suture lines sprung open from each other. Did he fall? Like hit his head on a rock? You know, basically in the forest, that could have happened. There is no way to at least scientifically show that it was in one direction or the other direction, or some unknown direction. So the cause of death of David is listed as undetermined. We were left hanging. It was extremely frustrating because deep down, we felt something had happened to David that was illegal. Virginia found his bike. She was always right out there in front trying to find something, and she definitely wasn't going to take undetermined as an answer. David's sister kept this case alive. She was trying to assist, trying to provide leads, doing her best to make sure that there was still a need for an explanation as to what happened to David. But without proof of foul play, investigators don't have just cause to pursue a person responsible. The grim mystery of David's death leaves the people of Skeelkilhaven wondering if they will ever know the truth. We knew we found him. We didn't know who put him there or how he got there. I think after that happened, we looked at everybody a little bit differently. Not just as, could you have been the one to do this? But do you know something? Somebody has to know something. The original pathologist's conclusion that David's diabetic condition was a cause in the death of David. It doesn't seem to fit what took place. David never hurt anybody in town. He was just a happy-go-lucky kid, making a few bucks on the side, delivering the newspaper. It was upsetting that something could happen to David that was just not right. Somebody had done him in, was the general feeling. People were always asking, what happened to that Reed kid? Does anybody really know what happened to him? He was partially buried. I mean, if you get sick and you fall over, you don't partially bury yourself. I also had a gnarly kind of a feeling inside that something just didn't sit quite right. It's pretty rare that you have a 13-year-old die in the woods accidentally. We had no idea what happened to David Reed. We knew that this was his remains. But in terms of those moments that were associated with his death, this was just an unknown. While investigators look for evidence of foul play, David's family and friends gathered to say goodbye. I was at the funeral. It was very sad. Dave was a tall, husky kid. He was, big. And there he was being buried in a baby casket. And we knew we didn't have, his whole body there. And it wasn't, fresh, because it had been a while since they found him. But it was just, it was really sad. It was really just, heartbreaking to see. His mom was just so devastated that although she wanted the answers, she just didn't have the strength to do it herself. His sister, Ginny, Virginia, she wasn't going to let this be forgotten or swept under the rug. She was out there still, and doing everything she can, and contacting the police like you need to do more, and talking to his friends and, asking questions. In this area. Sometimes rumors. Word of mouth is a lot faster than the internet. A lot of times, stories can travel very quickly from neighbor to neighbor. One individual named Kathy came forward with information about David getting into a blue van. She even supplied registration from the van. We immediately had that broadcast across the county. We would stop blue vans. We'd ask other people about blue vans. It was a wide net we were throwing. It was scary walking to and from school. I seen a strange car going, especially if it was a van. I would just hide so they couldn't see me, because the fear. I don't want to be the next one to go. We were able to run numerous ways of that license plate. A B instead of an 8, and we tried to run it in various different ways to come up with a vehicle that it would match, and none of it was successful. Most people cannot remember their own license plate. Never mind another one that just happens to drive by. No matter what they do, detectives can't find evidence that David was murdered. How he ended up dead in the woods remains a mystery. after a year. The case of the boy who rode off on his bike and never came home goes as cold as snow atop the Pennsylvania mountains. It was nothing. We buried him, and then there was nothing. There was no mention. No new leads. No new. Hey, we think we might know. Nobody coming up to say, hey, I saw him that night. There was just nothing. Over the years, 5 years would come along, 10 years would come along. It was just more frustration for everybody, because to us, it felt like nobody cared. Over 15 years of no closure go by, leaving a hole in the hearts of those who loved David the most. His mom was devastated through the whole thing. She turned to alcohol to try to get through. And she turned to, she would drink, and she would drink a lot. And she actually passed from cirrhosis of the liver years later. Virginia was the force that kept this case alive. She refused to accept the account that was provided. So she was the one that was in touch with law enforcement, letting them know that I'm here looking for closure on this case. I was sitting in my office one day, and an individual came in and introduced himself as Trooper Bob Bettner, and that he had been assigned to reopen a cold case of David Reed. This is something that should not happen in a small town like Schuylkill Haven. I think the town. Many of the parents and elders felt that they let David Reed down, let the family down, that one, that this happened to David, and two, that this mystery dragged on for so many years. When I had heard about David's case, I lobbied for it. I wanted to be a part of it. Finally, it was somebody in our corner. Somebody that wanted justice for Davin was be damned if he didn't get it. You're not solving this investigation without taking it home. Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, there had to be a commitment. And I made up the decision that I was going to be responsible for giving that family hope again and reaffirming their faith in law enforcement. I approached this case like other investigations, as a sprint, not realizing that a cold case was going to be a marathon. Solving the mystery surrounding David Reed's death now falls to Trooper Robert Bettnar. He begins by reaching out to David's sister, Virginia. Virginia began to cry uncontrollably on the phone. She thought that nobody had cared. The initial investigation. There were a number of photographs that we would spread out on the tables. X-rays, Kodachromes, Polaroids, TV footage, autopsy report. There was a lot to digest from that original investigation. My gut reaction was that David Reed had been murdered. David's remains were found in a wooded area that was not known to be frequented by area youths or kids. That led me to one of two conclusions: that David Reed had died at that location, or somebody had dumped his body there. Bettnar focuses on the interviews police conducted when David first went missing. Eventually, he zeroes in on someone who wouldn't talk to investigators back in 1985. This individual did have ties to David Reed's family, specifically his sister and his older brothers. He did not cooperate with the initial investigation. He did not like the police because he was a drug dealer. But he was also incarcerated at this time. And when the police went to talk to him in jail, he wanted nothing to do with them. When I approached this guy, he was shocked that I wanted to talk to him about the death of David Reed. That one moment I had with him put the case in a new direction that gave me a lot of hope that this case would be solved. This individual provided us with the name and an owner of an individual who owned a light blue colored van. It's not the first time investigators have heard about a blue van when they run the van owner's name. The case takes a major turn. He has prior convictions for crimes against minors, and he was arrested a year after David disappeared. There were always rumors circulating about an abduction that took place, that there was a van that may have abducted David and took him away from the area. I'm not only given the owner of a light blue colored van, but I'm given the identity of an individual that resides in Schuylkill Haven that's a nefarious individual that's sexually abusing children. He fit our profile. We've not talked to him yet. And wouldn't you know it, the person we suspected in David Reed's death has just walked through the front door. We're all excited that, you know, we may have solved this case in a short matter of time. And they're like, hey, Rob, he's here. You know, he's here to talk to you. And they're thinking he wants to talk to me for this case. It was crazy. It was surreal. But the explanation was much more innocent than that. He was there for his annual Megan's Law registration. Under Pennsylvania's Megan's Law, sexual offenders must update their home of record should they move or relocate within the state. He was cooperative, but he could also tell it was very painful for him to discuss his past. When he walks out of that interview, I was very confident that this individual was not going to be David's killer. When investigators dive deeper into this possible suspect record, they discover that he was in federal prison when David went missing. It was very disheartening to exclude the Megan's Law offender. I remember one of my immediate supervisors even coming to me and asking, "Are we done now? Are you satisfied?" You know, he took a shot at it. It was a good run. Bednar hasn't run out of steam yet. He calls on David's sister Virginia again, this time with a very specific request. We were going to put this case on TV, and we were going to get flyers and put them out. And David Reed's sister, Virginia, she was going to be the face of this case. She agreed to do that. And that publicity allowed us to get more people to come forward. Virginia Meadows, flanked by a state trooper and a county detective, looks over some of the evidence into the 20-year-old death of her teen brother. I think he was murdered. I do. And I know somebody knows something. And it just ain't saying it. We went out looking for witnesses and start interviewing anybody that knew David Reed, any associates of his family, and we went out and found these people. Out of a sea of interviews, one name comes up more than once. One of the red flags that people in the community had raised to us is that after David's disappearance, Joe Geiger disappeared. Joe Geiger, the same man who had been collecting bones on his front porch back in 1985. Something was up when Joe said that he had bones from Dave's jaw. I can't imagine why they didn't know something was up right then and there. They came back to the house and they were chewing on bones, and at the time I didn't think nothing of it. The fact that Joe Geiger is the one that's turning over David's remains to law enforcement, it's either Joe is incredibly smart or Joe is incredibly stupid. Joseph Geiger was not only a local small-time drug dealer, but he used to grow his own marijuana plants back behind his house. In fact, in the wooded area where David Reed's body was found, every rumor that went around, it had Joe Geiger attached to it. There was a rumor that Dave urinated on Joe Geiger's pot plants. There was another rumor that he tried to steal his pot plant. He's no longer around town. He's no longer associating with friends. He becomes a recluse after David Reed goes missing. We needed certain dominoes to fall for this to all come to fruition. We needed Joe Geiger to come in for an interview. Trooper Bednar told us that he was receiving more information regarding the death of David Reed, and he believed the investigation was going to point in the direction of Joe Geiger. I remember hearing stories that, you know, Joe Geiger would be at parties telling people, well, if you want to murder somebody, do it in Schuylkill County because you can get away with it. The family would tell the police that, and I don't know if they took it seriously or what they did, but not at the time. At least, detectives want to question the now 40-year-old Geiger. He does walk into the barracks, and he had told us that he'd only seen David around town once, and then he ends up by my house dead. He barely knew him. And I said, well, let me tell you what the people of Schuylkill County think of Joseph Geiger. What he did, that he knew David Reed. We knew Joe Geiger had some involvement in David's death, and we overwhelmed him. He had no alibi. He had nothing. And he was boxed in. He knew it, and he breaks. Geiger tells Trooper Bednar, I was there. I saw it. And it was John Fry. Joe tells us that the three of them had met down at the bank wall, and the train tracks are right there. Then they would go back to the train tracks and hang out. In 1985, John Fry, a smaller kid. He's a kid that would get in trouble drinking alcohol, smoking pot. But he was friends with Dave. He ran with those circles. The story that Rob received from Joe originally was that John Fry punched David in the face. David fell backwards, and he hit his head, and that's what happened. So after Trooper Bednar confronts Geiger, he then goes to John Fry. John Fry gives us a consistent statement with Joe Geiger. Only he indicates that Joe Geiger is the person that hit David Reed and not him. Which one of these individuals is lying? Or is it both of them that are lying to law enforcement at this point? We need more. And the hope is that, because it's decades later, that now, at this point, science can provide a better explanation as to what happened to David. We always knew that there was one key piece of evidence that can help us solve David Reed's case. And that piece of evidence was David Reed himself, buried 6 feet under at the Schuylkill Memorial Cemetery, with approval from David's family. Schuylkill Haven investigators exhumed David's body. The day that Dave was exhumed. It was a cold day. We weren't allowed at the area. We just stood there and we just watched, seeing that little baby casket he was buried in. It is heartbreaking, you know? 20 years later, I think that's probably when I broke down, the minute I saw that box again. You know, it's not fair. We were given very specific facts as to how David died. We wanted to take that scenario to an anthropologist to get a professional opinion. Trooper Bednar had done research regarding who was the best expert to take David's remains to, and Dr. Falsetti in Florida was the individual that he had found. David's remains are immediately flown from Schuylkill Haven to Tampa, Florida, where they'll be re-examined. So the airline brings myself, Corporal Kevin Brennan, and David on the plane before anybody else. We have David in between us in a casket. As people are coming on the plane, they're asking, "Hey, what's in the box?" And Kevin goes, "It's a little boy's body." And we proceed to tell people that this is a homicide investigation. And as this plane goes up and the seatbelt light goes off, a line on the plane forms on us. 40, 50 people. And we have a funeral line. People coming to us. Can I touch his casket? Absolutely. They're putting their hand on the casket. They're saying prayers. We saw the very best of humanity that day. We really did. I think. You know, if Dave can be looking down, he probably loved that ride. He wanted to be a pilot. I think that if he were here today, that's exactly where he'd be. Finally, you know, we're going to get the answers. This is going to be what we need to get the answers. And we're finally going to get the justice. So as hurtful as it was, emotionally as it was all worth it. Anthropologist Janet Monge joins the all-star team that will pore over David's remains for a second time. So, to revisit a case is rare, and coming back was unusual as well as really piquing my curiosity. We were able to take the skull over to the hospital and have a medical CT scan actually produced. This allowed us to more realistically look at that burst fracture at the back of the skull. First in that cheek region are a series of hairline fractures. Looks like some kind of a blow, powerful enough that this could have produced a fall backwards, in which event he would have hit the back of his head that then produced the burst fractures, and then we could actually see it on the CT scan. It was consistent with what was described as the sequence of events that led, essentially to his death. Because of Janet Mange's work and her examination of David, we were in fact able to get the cause of manner changed to blunt force trauma and the manner of death to homicide. Now it's game on for the first time in 23 years. We can make an arrest for criminal homicide in David Reed's case. Investigators know that David was killed by a blow to the head. Now they have to determine whether it was Joe Geiger or John Fry who dealt that blow. Predictably, each of them blames the other for David Reed's murder. We had a nearly 600-page report with all these different pieces of a puzzle, and it was our job to paint a picture, tell a story that's logical, conclusive, truthful, objective. Joe Geiger was not only growing marijuana plants, but he was angry that somebody was stealing those plants, and we were able to flush that out conclusively. Investigators noticed something about John Fry that rules him out. John Fry was a right-handed person. Joe was left-handed. We observed when he signed his right warning and waiver, He used his left hand. David had a fracture on the right side of his face, and we felt if two individuals were facing each other, if there were going to be a fight, that fracture on the right side of the face would have been more consistent with being struck by a left-handed person as opposed to a right-handed person. The fractures on David's skull, combined with Joe Geiger's account, give investigators enough to make an arrest. We got the warrant issued on August 20th, and really for symbolic purposes. We wanted that arrest made on that anniversary date. Mixed emotions come into play again because we're finally getting him arrested. He's finally going to pay for what he did. But then it's you had 23 years of freedom to walk around. Now it's finally justice for Dave. Before Bednar gets a chance to share the victory with Virginia, she passes away. It was her son that found her on the couch. It was hard to think. Finally, after all this time, answers were coming, and she wasn't going to be here to see the final outcome of it. She turned to drugs and tried to numb the pain of losing her brother. She tried really hard to light a fire under somebody to get answers. And I think it sent her into, a depression that she couldn't get out of. Jenny needed something to get through because it was always on her mind. It was eating her away inside. And it just brought her to her end before she finished the story. If I had to picture what that day would be like when David's killer was arrested 10 out of 10 times, I was there with Virginia. She was there. There would be that moment. And when I lost that, that hurt. It always will. Joe Geiger is charged with third-degree murder, manslaughter, tampering with physical evidence, and abuse of a corpse. Due to the limited witnesses available, prosecutors allowed Geiger to plead guilty to the involuntary manslaughter charge. This was a 20-year-old guy that was hanging out with 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds, and they were intimidated by him. They were fearful of him, even as adults. They were not willing to cross this guy or testify against him. What was important to me was that I was able to go back to David's family and tell them what happened to their brother, to their uncle, to their friend, to their family member. That was the most important part of the case for me. As part of the plea agreement, one of the requirements for Geiger was that he had to disclose what happened in the train car on that day. What did he do to David Reed? I wanted a confession. I wanted Joe Geiger to come in and confess to all of us. Geiger explained to us that he was growing marijuana plants, and he had discovered that David was stealing his plants, and that he was angry. Infuriated by this, Geiger and Frey found David near the empty cabooses on the railroad tracks, a known hangout spot for the young boy. He confronted David in the train, and John Frey was there, and that, during the confrontation, he admitted to punching David, and that when David fell backwards, he hit his head off of a metal object. After he hit David, the city started crying. They panicked, and they went downtown, and then went back to the train car, hoping he wasn't there. And unfortunately, David was still there. He thought he was dead, and rather than notifying anybody, he took the coward's way out, and he hid his body. When you look back, those dogs actually set in motion a chain of events and helped link Joe Geiger to David's death. I'm glad that he did have to tell what happened in his plea deal, but I think that a lot of it, like the crying, they told me he cried a lot. I think that was more because he was caught, because in court, he showed no remorse. A judge sentences Geiger to no more than 2 years behind bars. Joe took away my friend. He took away my cousin. He took away someone I thought of as another brother. He was a beautiful soul. He was such a loving boy, loved his family, his friends. I wish he had the opportunity to grow up as I did. It just seems so unfair, and I'm so sorry that his life was cut so short. I just want them to remember him just riding his bike and being a paper boy. And he was a hard worker. He gave that his all, and he wasn't afraid. He just went out and did what he wanted to do. And I want them to remember him happy and the loving kid that he was.